Hello, my name is Monica Brown, and I teach 8th grade U.S. History and Social Studies at Key Middle School. Today I'm going to take you through a lesson that explores what happened at Lexington and Concord. We will look at exactly what happened and we'll explore some of the major players during this battle. But before I begin, there are a couple of things that you are going to need for today's lesson. You will need to have a pen or a pencil, and you will need to have paper. And if you have a journal that you prefer to use, you most certainly can use your journal to write in. So let's take a look at our learning targets today. You will be able to explain the issues surrounding the important events of the American Revolution, and this includes the Declaration of Independence, fighting the battles of Lexington and Concord, Saratoga, Yorktown, enduring the Winter of Valley Forge, and signing the Treaty of Paris of 1783. You will also be able to explain the significance of the 1776 adoption of the Declaration of Independence. There's a few vocabulary words that I want you to know before we get into our reading today. So let's go through these together. We have the battles of Lexington and Concord. Well, this is the first battle of the American Revolution, and this occurred in 1775. The word militia. Militia means that it's a group of civilians that are trained to be soldiers, but they're not part of a formal military. Redcoats, a term that's used to refer to soldiers in the British Army. And finally, the term grievance. Grievance means that you have a reason for complaining or being unhappy with a situation. What exactly are we discussing today? Well, here's your guiding question that might help you get through the lesson. As we consider that escalating protests can often lead to conflict and violent outbreaks, why were the battles of Lexington and Concord critical in the American Revolution? Well, let's take a look at a photo, maybe to give you an idea of what the scenery was like at that time. As you look at the photo that I'm about to show you, I want you to apply optics to see if you can break down and see what exactly is going on. So remember that optics stands for objects, people, title and time period, inference, and conclusion. So take a few moments to look at the following photo, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so you're probably wondering what you were looking at. Well, this is a painting that's titled The Battle of Lexington by Amos Doolittle. It shows the battle of the American Revolution, the war for American independence. So far, we've learned all about the causes of this momentous historical event. But what about this battle? How important is this first battle? I want you to take a moment and think about that. How important is the first battle that leads to the American Revolution? Here's something to consider. When fighting a war, does it matter who wins the first battle? Why or why not? So maybe you can apply this to yourself and say, if you are in an argument with someone, does it matter which person wins the argument? Is it more important that you get your point across? Or is it more important that the other person gets their point across? And why would it be important? You probably said that it's more important for you to get your point across. I would probably say the same thing. So why is that important? Same thing with fighting a war. Why does it matter who wins? Who wins the battle? Here's a sentence stem that I would like for you to use. When fighting a war, it does or does not matter who wins the first battle, because take a moment to fill in that, and then I'll come right back to you. So, as we are talking about winning wars and battles, you're probably wondering, well, what's the difference between a war and a battle? Have you thought that? What's the difference between the two? Well, a war, you can look at it, is more like a novel. Say if you're reading a big book, the war would be the book. And then we can say that the battles represent the chapters in the book. So it takes up every chapter to make up that book. This is probably what you'll find as we read more about the American Revolution, that there's little battles as we go through that lead up to the big war. So as we focus on the American Revolution, specifically the battles of Lexington and Concord, I want you to consider the issues that are surrounding those battles. I'm going to read a passage and I want you to follow along with me. Pay attention to the key players and pay attention to the sequence of events that is going on. The battles of Lexington and Concord, the shock heard around the world. The first encounter of the American Revolution stemmed from the British goal of seizing a supply of weapons and ammunition that the Americans had collected at Concord, some 18 miles from Boston. The task fell to General Thomas Gage, who was also the royal governor of Massachusetts. Now, General Gage was not a bad sort. In fact, he had an American wife. But as a British soldier and royal governor, it was his duty to send troops to Concord to take possession of the weapons. When the Americans got word of Gage's intentions, they reacted immediately. Three riders, Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott, were sent to different routes to warn the people of Concord. Then, at approximately 4:30 on the morning of April 19, 1775, the British reached Lexington, Massachusetts. There they were, met by some 70 militia under the command of Captain Parker, waiting for them. At some point, a shot rang out, the shot heard around the world. No one knows for certain who fired first. Each side afterwards blamed the other. But it really didn't matter. There was no turning back. The revolution had begun. The British declared victory and marched on to Concord. The clash at Concord. As the sun rose, the British marched on to Concord. There they encountered a force composed of over 300 farmers, craftsmen, and shopkeepers from neighboring towns who had noted the ringing of the bell in Concord and hurried to reinforce the 150 Concord militiamen already there. In the face of such large numbers, the British began to retreat back to Boston. The retreat along the road to Boston was a nightmare for King George's troops. Trained to fight in tight formation, they were no match for the militiamen. Each time the redcoats passed and disappeared from view, the Americans ran alongside them, hidden by the woods, took up new positions ahead, and fired away as they reappeared. As it turned out, the British suffered 273 casualties on the 18-mile retreat to Boston. The American casualties totaled about half that number. British learned an important lesson. By the end of the day, 74 British soldiers were dead and another 200 were wounded or missing. The colonists counted their own losses as 49 dead and 41 wounded. Indeed, since the French and Indian War, the British had mistaken about Americans again and again. Their biggest mistake, however, was in thinking that ordinary people, farmers, merchants, workers, and housewives, would not fight for rights that they held dear. At Lexington and Concord, Americans proved they were not only willing to fight for their rights, they were even willing to die for them. Okay, so let's debrief from what we just read. I have 4 questions that I want to present to you, and so let's go through these and then we'll try to answer them. First, what finally prompted the American Revolution to begin? Okay, so do you remember what were the facts that prompted the American Revolution to start? What happened? Second, who won the Battle of Lexington? Third, who won the battle at Concord? And your fourth question is, what did these battles prove? Well, let's see. What finally prompted the American Revolution to begin? Well, the British wanted to seize or take away the weapons from Americans. The British troops, if you remember, began marching towards Lexington, okay? I don't think that was going to go down very well. Who won the Battle of Lexington? Well, the British did, but the colonists won the battle at Concord. And so finally, we have to ask, what did these battles even prove? Well, it proved that Americans were willing to fight and die for their rights. It proved that it didn't matter what it took, that they were ready to put their lives on the line. I mean, we weren't talking about an organized military. We were talking about farmers and shopkeepers, just normal everyday people that were willing to fight for what they believed in. Okay, so now you have an assignment. You have a writing assignment that I want you to complete. This is a historical marker. It's called the Battles of Lexington and Concord. So the Massachusetts Historical Society has asked you to design a historical marker that will be placed at the site of the Battle of Concord. They ask that your marker commemorate the start of the American Revolution by explaining the issues surrounding the events that occurred at Lexington and Concord. Make sure that you have the following must-haves. You must have the name of the event, the date of the event, and the location of the event. You must have a description of the issues surrounding the battles, what prompted this event to happen, what caused the American Revolution to finally begin. You must also have a brief explanation of the battles, who was involved, who won, and who lost. And then finally, give me a statement of impact of these battles. In other words, what did these battles demonstrate? What did they prove? So I've gone back through the readings and I have highlighted certain things. So the first thing is, how did it start? Well, I've highlighted the American Revolution stemmed from the British goal of seizing a supply of weapons and ammunition that the Americans had collected at Concord. I've highlighted several other factors. So we see that the location is Concord. The date and time was 4:30 in the morning on the morning of April 19th, 1775. The location, Lexington, Massachusetts. And then what happened? You see, I've highlighted here in green that they were met by some 70 militia under the command of Captain Parker, waiting for them. And at some point, a shot heard around the world. No one knows for certain who fired, and the battle began. I've also highlighted a couple of other things, such as who was involved. Okay, so we had 300 farmers, craftsmen, shopkeepers from neighboring towns. We had 150 Concord militiamen that were already there. And then who is losing this battle? It looks like the British aren't doing too well at this point. They are beginning to lose this battle. Who is losing this battle? Again, I have highlighted in green. Okay, you see where it says retreat along the road to Boston was a nightmare for King George's troops. Even though they were trained to fight, they were no match at all for the militiamen. And then who is losing the battle again? I highlighted again that the British suffered 273 casualties. But then here I have who's winning? The Americans. They had half of the casualties that the British had. What did this prove? Well, like I said earlier, it proved that people were willing to do whatever it needed to be in order to win this battle. It didn't mean that it was an organized military, but there were just everyday people that wanted to be a part of this movement. So you're back to your assignment page, and I'll hold this up for a little bit for you to refer to. You have several moments to complete this assignment. I hope that you were able to take some notes while we were reading and that you were to remember some of the key things. Again, you know the name of the event, where it took place, what happened, who was winning and who was losing, and ultimately, what did it prove? Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you were able to learn about the battle at Lexington and Concord and really take away from this lesson that people were willing to fight for what they believed in, much like people will do today. I'm Monica Brown. I teach 8th grade social studies and history at Key Middle School. Bye.